Rain pattered against the tin awning, each drop shattering on the cracked pavement, carrying away bits of yellow leaves and dust. The streetlights cast a glow onto the sidewalk, reflecting off the shimmering puddles, cold and broken like shards of a mirror. A distant car horn, the sound of rain falling, the wet thud of soaked shoes hitting the ground, all of it came together into a wordless, sorrowful song, seeping into your skin, crawling into the darkest corners of your heart. A man stood under the awning of a small roadside diner, holding a paper coffee cup that had long gone cold. His eyes stared out into the rainy street, a gaze so distant, so deep, it was like the bottom of an old, endless well. Tiny raindrops clung to the silver strands in his hair, glistening under the yellow streetlight. He gently squeezed the coffee cup in his hand. A thin hand, the knuckles protruding beneath skin weathered by time. Inside the diner, a tired neon light flickered. The sizzle of hot oil, the clatter of plates, someone calling out an order, a child letting out a sharp cry from waiting too long for food. Amid the chaotic noise, a young man named Liam rushed back and forth, a tray trembling violently in his hands, beads of sweat dripping onto the collar of his faded uniform. His soaked hair stuck to his forehead, his torn shoes slipping on the grease-slicked floor, leaving small skid marks beneath his heels. "Where's my food?" "I've been waiting almost 40 minutes, an elderly woman slammed her hand on the table, her voice breaking with anger and hunger. Liam froze, eyes wide, panting, gripping the edge of the tray like it was the only thing keeping it from falling. He bowed his head, his voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry. I'll bring it right out." The apology was so soft it was nearly swallowed by the rain outside. But in Liam's eyes there was a trembling, determined light, like a small candle in a storm, about to be snuffed out but refusing to die. The man at the counter watched quietly, his eyes catching every detail: the shaking tray, the trembling hands, the exhaustion and patience in Liam's eyes, the soaked, torn shoes. He said nothing, just took a small sip of his cold coffee, eyes following Liam, as if searching for something in that moment. Another server brushed past and bumped into Liam, making the tray rattle, nearly spilling everything. Liam flinched, blinking rapidly to hold back the tears that were about to spill over. He took a deep breath, moved forward, and forced a tired smile at the next table, his voice rough. "I'm sorry for the wait." Another "I'm sorry," soft as a whisper. In that cramped room, where everyone was busy trying to survive, apologies became like breaths you breathe to live, and you apologize so you can keep going. The man at the counter turned away, his eyes slightly red, his hand tightening around the coffee cup. No one knew who he was. No one asked why he was there. To everyone else, he was just a stranger standing quietly in the corner of a cheap diner. But in that moment when Liam bowed his head in apology, when his hand trembled, placing the glass on the table, when that tired smile crossed his lips, the man knew it was time to break his silence. Liam pulled the hood of his hoodie over his head, hurrying through the pouring rain. His small backpack bounced on his back, the rain soaking through every layer of fabric, sticking to his skin, freezing cold. His worn-out sneakers made squishing sounds, rain mixing with mud splashing onto his pants, leaving dirty streaks. He ran along the crosswalk, the green and red lights from the traffic signals casting colors onto his pale face. Liam's breathing was heavy, each heartbeat pounding in his chest, like if he stopped, everything would collapse in that instant. "I'm sorry," Liam mumbled, almost to himself, glancing at his watch, seeing he was already 11 minutes late. The back door of the diner creaked as Liam pushed it open, his soaked footsteps leaving prints on the cold tiled floor. The heavy air smelled of old frying oil, mixing with the scent of rain clinging to his hair. At the end of the hallway, Derek stood with his arms crossed, holding an iced coffee, his eyes cold. "You're late." Liam froze, panting, one hand clutching the doorframe to keep himself standing, his voice breaking. "I just got out of school. I ran as fast as I could." Derek raised an eyebrow, took a sip of his coffee, his voice flat and emotionless. "Don't care. Next time, don't bother coming back." And with that, he turned away, leaving behind the faint scent of cold coffee and a thick, heavy silence. Liam stood there, eyes dropping to the floor, his lips pressed tightly together until they turned white, the last drops of rain falling from his hair to the ground, merging with the water leaking from his worn shoes. He walked into the locker room, a cramped space with 2 rusty coat hooks and a cracked mirror. Liam took off his soaked hoodie, hanging it up, pulling on his old apron, tying the frayed strings tightly behind his back. His hand trembled as he tied the knot, looking into the cracked mirror, seeing his own face with dark circles under his eyes, messy hair, and an exhausted stare. "I'll be okay. Just need to get through today," Liam whispered to himself, placing a hand on his chest, feeling his heart still racing, taking a deep breath, stepping out of the locker room. Liam blended into the rush in the kitchen, the sizzle of oil, the chop of knives on vegetables, the clatter of dishes, someone calling out an order in a rush, a baby crying from the dining area. Derek stood at the kitchen door, glancing at Liam. "Get to work. It's packed out there." Liam nodded, grabbed a water tray, and moved quickly into the dining area. Every step was heavy, but he kept his back straight, his eyes focused. He scanned the tables, a family trying to calm a crying child, a young couple sitting in silence, the elderly man at the counter still polishing a clean glass with an old rag, his eyes following every move Liam made. Liam placed the tray down at table 5, offering a small smile, speaking softly, "I'm sorry for the wait. Here's your water." The woman looked at him, letting out a long sigh, her eyes softening slightly though her voice still tense. "Thank you. Please don't make us wait that long next time." Liam bowed his head. "Yes, Mom, I'm sorry." And he moved on, not allowing himself to pause, not allowing himself to take a deep breath, because he knew if he stopped, his body might collapse at any moment. From the counter, the stranger kept watching, a glint of sadness in his eyes as he saw Liam's thin frame sway under the weight of the large tray as he weaved through the crowded tables. He saw the sweat drip from Liam's chin onto the tile, disappearing into the air, like Liam's youth, dissolving into these endless shifts. The rain outside continued to fall, blending with the hum of the exhaust fan, the smell of food mixing with the damp scent of rain, and the heavy scent of exhaustion that had not yet faded. In that tiny world, a young man kept moving, carrying heavy trays, enduring customers' harsh stares, enduring Derek's unjust scolding, and carrying the weight of dreams that had yet to bloom. The sounds in the diner were like a wave that never stopped, the chop of knives on cutting boards, the kitchen bell ringing repeatedly, customers calling for servers, children crying for food, the tired whispers of staff nearing collapse. Liam slipped between the crowded tables, the heavy tray in his hands, sweat rolling down his neck, soaking through the faded uniform. Every step was rushed but careful, afraid to spill a glass of water, afraid to trip, afraid of hearing Derek's voice barking from behind. He set a glass down at table 7, bowing slightly. "I'm sorry for making you wait." A middle-aged man in an old suit glanced at him, then at his hungry, whimpering child, and nodded. "Yeah, thank you." Liam turned away, not letting himself sigh, his eyes moving to another table where someone was waving. A child had knocked over a glass of apple juice, the pale liquid spreading across the table, dripping to the floor, falling drop by drop. The mother frantically looked for napkins, her face tense. The child whimpered, eyes red, small hands clutching at the hem of their mother's shirt. Liam walked over, knelt down, wiping up every drop of the spilled juice, looking up with a gentle smile. "It's okay, kiddo. This happens to everyone." The child looked at him, tears still clinging to their lashes, lips trembling before slowly breaking into a small smile. The mother let out a relieved breath, eyes grateful, nodding, "Thank you." Liam stood up, turned to leave, but before stepping away, he glanced back at the child, seeing that fear had left their eyes. In that moment, even if just for a second, he felt he had done something that mattered. At the counter, the man still stood polishing the glass, his eyes never leaving Liam. He saw it all, every drop of sweat, every hurried step, every tired but gentle smile. His grip tightened around the glass, an indescribable feeling rising in his chest, part sorrow, part anger, part admiration. In another corner, Junie, a young server with her hair tied back, her face weary but her eyes resolute, fumbled at the drink station, her hands trembling as she filled each soda glass. She turned to Liam as he passed, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Hey, drink some water. You haven't had any since you started." Liam shook his head, offering a tired smile. "It's okay. There are still a lot of tables waiting." Junie glanced around, fear flashing in her eyes. "Don't let Derek see, or you know what will happen." Liam froze, his heart pounding, then nodded softly, moving on. In his mind, Junie's words echoed, blending with the ringing kitchen bell, the customers calling, the children crying a sad melody with no end. Don't let Derek see. No one will help you. If you quit, they'll cut your hours next week. These soft, whispered words were like needles piercing Liam's heart. In that world, people learned to stay silent, to endure, to smile even when they were so tired they felt like collapsing, because if they didn't, they would lose the only job keeping them alive, even if that job was killing them, little by little. Liam lifted his shoulders slightly, raised his head, took a deep breath, and stepped forward again. In his eyes was a fragile but persistent determination, his thin hands holding the water tray firmly, even as each finger began to go numb from exhaustion. He knew he couldn't stop. None of them could stop. The hood of the exhaust fan roared, blending with the crackle of hot oil, the scent of steaming food mixing with the smell of sweat, creating a heavy, clinging air that stuck to the skin. Liam moved quickly through the kitchen, dodging trays of food being carried out, his eyes darting over each order slip pinned in front of him, his lips softly repeating the orders to himself so he wouldn't make a mistake. His hand trembled slightly as he carried a large tray of hot food, the plates steaming with heat. He stretched to keep his balance, beads of sweat running from his temples down his neck, soaking into the apron that had long since lost its color. One slip, and the tray could fall. And he knew Derek wouldn't let it slide. He stepped into the dining area, offering a tired but gentle smile as he placed the plate on the table. "Here's your burger without cheese, Ma'am. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting." The woman nodded, her eyes softening a little. But before Liam could turn away, Derek's voice sliced through the air behind him, sharp as a knife. Liam messing up again. "Huh, I told you to check the slip before taking it out." "Is that so hard?" Liam froze, his heart pounding, his throat dry. He pressed his lips together, eyes dropping to the torn shoes on his feet, his hands clutching the edge of his apron tightly. "Yes, I'm sorry." Derek jerked his chin, his voice dripping with disdain. "Stop saying sorry all the time. Just do it right. If you can't, then quit around them." A few customers glanced over, some shaking their heads, others whispering to their companions. Liam looked up, his eyes meeting the gaze of the man still standing at the counter, polishing a glass. The man said nothing, just gave a small nod, like a silent message. Breathe, then keep going. Liam lowered his head, nodded slightly, then quickly walked back toward the kitchen to swap the order, each step steady even as his thin shoulders trembled slightly. In that moment, he realized how used he had become to the yelling, to the silence of those around him, to apologizing for mistakes that weren't even his fault. Junie passed by, carrying a tray of water, her eyes sneaking a glance at Liam as she whispered softly as she passed. "You okay?" Liam gave a small, thin smile, like a thread about to snap. "Yeah," but in his eyes, Junie saw the exhaustion, saw the red marks on his wrists where the apron ties had cut too tightly, saw the sweat that wouldn't stop dripping, saw the loneliness squeezing Liam in a world filled with noise but lacking genuine care. Liam placed the food at the correct table, bowing his head to apologize again. The woman nodded, her eyes now gentle, her hand resting lightly on Liam's arm, giving a soft squeeze. "Thank you, dear." Liam looked at her, a brief light flickering in his eyes. Then he bowed, smiled, and walked away. At the counter, the stranger continued to watch quietly, a look of determination in his eyes. He polished the glass once more, set it down, and clenched his hand tightly. He knew he couldn't just stand by anymore. In a corner of the diner, the old wall clock ticked steadily, each second dragging on endlessly. Liam poured water, set it on tables, cleared dirty dishes, wiped stains from surfaces, picked up dropped spoons, all in silence, without a single complaint. When he turned around, the tray in his hand shook slightly, a glass tipping, droplets of water splashing onto the back of his hand, cold as ice. Liam stared at the glass, at his trembling hands, then took a deep breath, steadying himself, adjusting the glass on the tray. One breath, one more step, one tired smile. At the counter, the man exhaled softly, his eyes on Liam, giving a small nod. In this noisy world, they had found each other, even if only for a brief moment. The sound of a glass shattering cut through the heavy, exhausted air like a blade. For a single second, all the noise in the crowded diner seemed to freeze, before bursting again with a child's sharp cry, customers' annoyed whispers. Junie stood frozen, still holding the tray that had just fallen. Shards of glass scattered across the floor, cold water pooling into a shimmering patch under the weary neon light. Her face went pale, eyes wide, breath broken. Her hands trembled, her mouth opening to apologize, but no words came out. The sound of Derek's footsteps approached, steady and heavy. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes glancing over Junie, his voice cold. "Are you serious? Do you know how much each of those glasses cost?" Junie bowed her head, mumbling, "I'm sorry, I'll clean it up." Derek's voice dropped low but was sharp as a blade. "Sorry, doesn't pay for the glass. Junie, clean it up, and don't disturb the customers." Junie knelt down, her hands shaking as she picked up the shards, a piece slicing into her finger, dark red blood mixing with the cold water on the floor. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tears welling up and falling, blending with the blood and water, impossible to tell apart. Liam saw from across the room, his hand gripping the tray so tightly it turned white. He took a breath, set the tray down at the counter, and quickly walked over, kneeling beside Junie. He grabbed a paper towel, carefully picking up each shard, wiping the blood from her hand. His eyes steady. "Let me help." Junie looked up, her tear-filled eyes trembling, her mouth quivering. "Liam, you don't have to." Liam shook his head slightly, his voice firm. "It's okay. You're not alone." Derek stood with arms crossed, watching them, scoffing coldly. Bunch of troublemakers. Liam looked up, his eyes meeting Derek's for the first time without dropping, without avoiding. In that moment, all the noise around them seemed to disappear, leaving only Junie's ragged breaths, Liam's heart pounding in his chest, and Derek's cold stare. Derek turned away, stepping into the manager's office, slamming the door shut. The door rattled softly, the sound echoing in that brief silence. Liam and Junie finished cleaning up the shards, wiping the floor dry, throwing the broken pieces into the trash, then stood up. Junie looked at Liam, tears still glistening at the corners of her eyes, offering a faint, weak smile. "Thank you, Liam." Liam nodded, a small smile crossing his tired face. "It's okay. I know what that feels like." In a corner of the diner, the man polishing the glass stood still, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and resolve. He knew he had just witnessed something more important than anything else. Kindness still existed, even when everything else was weighing down on these young lives. Liam returned to the counter, picked up the water tray, and continued working. His steps were slower, but steadier. His eyes no longer avoided customers' gazes, no longer feared Derek's glare. He began to smile at the customers as he handed them their water, bowing his head in thanks when he received their empty glasses. At table 4, an elderly woman looked at Liam, offering a kind smile. "You're working so hard, dear." Liam froze, his heart trembling at those words so simple, yet ones he hadn't heard in so long. He smiled, warmth shining in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am, I'm okay. Thank you." The woman nodded, her gentle eyes following Liam as he turned away, continuing his endless work. In that moment, a child's laughter rang out at a nearby table, mixing with the sound of the rain slowing outside the awning, and the gentle aroma of freshly baked bread weaving through the air, pushing away some of the stifling heaviness of the diner. The kitchen bell kept ringing non-stop, order slips printing out with a clatter, stacking into a tall pile in front of the cooks. The heat from the kitchen mixed with the scent of frying oil, sauce, and a faint smoky smell, blending with the sweat that had soaked into Liam's uniform without him realizing it. He moved quickly between the tables, carrying the water tray, his eyes darting to each customer's wave, each urgent request: a glass of water, a plate of bread with extra butter, a napkin, a bill to be settled, all of it overlapping, intertwining, pulling him into a whirlwind with no exit. At the drink station, Junie was pouring soda, her hand still wrapped in a bandage from the cut she got the day before, trembling slightly as she held the glass. She glanced at Liam as he passed, giving a small nod, saying nothing, but in her eyes was a quiet understanding. Derek stepped out of the manager's office, a cold coffee in his hand, his eyes sweeping over the dining area, stopping when he saw Liam wiping down table 3. Liam, his voice sharp as it cut through the air. Liam froze, turning his head, a flicker of worry in his eyes. "Yes." Derek lowered his voice, but each word was clear. Table 5 complained that their food was cold. "How many times do I have to tell you? Get it out as soon as it's ready." Liam swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest, still holding the cleaning cloth, his voice small. "I'm sorry. I was just cleaning the table." Derek scoffed, taking a sip of his coffee, looking Liam straight in the eyes. "Sorry doesn't pay the bill for the customers. Don't make me tell you again." Liam lowered his head, his thin shoulders trembling slightly, pressing his lips together. "Yes, I understand." Derek turned away, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor, leaving a heavy air behind him. Liam took a deep breath, finishing wiping the last streak of water on the table, carefully setting the salt and pepper shakers back in place, adjusting the chairs before walking away. He picked up the water tray, stepping toward the counter, his hand gripping the edge so tightly the knuckles turned white. At a corner of the counter, the older man continued to quietly polish the glass, his eyes observing every detail, every bow of the head, every heavy breath Liam took. He saw the thin hand gripping the tray so hard that the bones stood out, saw the quiet patience in Liam's eyes as he watched over each customer. The elderly woman sitting at table 4 watched Liam, her eyes filled with compassion. That boy. He's carrying this entire diner on his shoulders. The man at the counter gave a small nod, a flash of determination in his eyes, a wave of helpless sorrow rising in his chest. A child's sharp cry erupted from table 7 as a glass of orange juice tipped over, spilling across the table and soaking the child's clothes. The mother frantically grabbed napkins to clean her child, repeatedly apologizing to everyone around them. Her eyes flickered with fear as she saw the juice spreading toward the table's edge, worried a staff member would scold her. Liam stepped over, knelt down, and began wiping the table with a soft smile. "It's okay, Mom. Let me take care of it." The child looked at Liam, tears still streaming down red cheeks, lips trembling. Liam looked at the child, giving a small wink, his voice low but warm. "This happens to everyone. Kiddo, no need to cry. Okay." The child glanced up at Liam, a spark of light in those eyes, a tiny smile breaking through on a face still sticky with orange juice. The mother let out a quiet sigh of relief, nodding in gratitude, her eyes filled with deep appreciation. Liam stood up, looking toward the counter, catching the gaze of the man watching him. That gaze held no pity, no judgment, but warmth, respect, and silent understanding. In that moment, Liam felt a little lighter, even as his shoulders still bore the exhaustion of another endless shift. He returned to the counter, continuing his work, his hands still trembling slightly, but his eyes steadier. The invisible walls of fear, of pressure, of silence began to crack as he started to understand he wasn't alone. In a small corner of this noisy diner, a man stood watching, quietly deciding, knowing it was time for these invisible walls to be torn down, starting right here. The afternoon dragged on, heavy like stones tied to his feet, pulling Liam through the crowded diner, the kitchen bell ringing for orders, customers calling for checks, children crying from hunger, all blending together, surrounding him like an invisible net with no escape. A printed ticket dropped down, clearly marked, "No cheese." Liam read it quickly, nodded, took the plate out to table 9, setting it down with a small smile. "Here's your sandwich, ma'am." The woman looked down, frowning. "I told you no cheese. This still has cheese." Liam froze for a moment, looking at the sandwich, the melted yellow cheese sticking to the bread. He looked up, his voice softening. "I'm so sorry. Let me get that fixed." Derek's footsteps approached, stopping behind him, his voice cold. "Messed up again." "Huh." Liam turned, eyes wide with panic, gripping the edge of the tray tightly. "I'm sorry. I read the ticket." Derek scoffed, looking at the woman with an exasperated expression. "The place is packed. Mistakes happen." Do you want it replaced? The woman looked at Derek, her eyes cold. Yes. Derek turned to Liam, his voice dropping lower but sharp as a blade. Get it fixed, and next time, I don't want to hear another apology. It's the customer's mistake, not yours. Liam bit his lip, bowed his head, taking the plate back to the kitchen. As he passed the counter, he bumped into Junie, who was carrying a tray of water, nearly spilling it onto the floor. Junie froze, worry in her eyes. Liam? Liam stopped, exhaled, and gave a tired smile. It's okay. He stepped into the kitchen, placed the plate down, and asked the cook to remake it. While waiting, Liam leaned against the wall, staring at the greasy floor, his hands curling into fists, fingernails pressing into his palms. Did I mess up, or am I just carrying mistakes that aren't mine? Derek's voice drifted in from outside, laughing and chatting sweetly with a regular customer. Just moments before, that same voice was a knife cutting into Liam's dignity, forcing him to take blame for mistakes that weren't his. Silence to keep working, silence to avoid getting hours cut, silence to hold on to the little paycheck. But the cost of that silence was dignity bleeding out a little every day, was lying curled up on a bed late at night as tears fell onto his pillow without warning. A fresh sandwich was handed out, and Liam took it, returning to the dining area with a strained smile. I'm sorry for the wait, ma'am. The woman nodded without a word, her eyes flicking toward Derek at the counter, then back at Liam, shaking her head softly, as if she understood he wasn't the one who should be apologizing. Liam turned, moving on to another table, calling for service. He overheard Junie speaking softly to an elderly customer, her voice tired but still polite. He saw Junie's hands tremble slightly as she handed over the check, her eyes dropping to avoid the customer's gaze. At the counter, the man polishing the glass kept watching, his eyes following Liam's every step, Junie's every movement, Derek's every dismissive flick of the chin, as if recording everything into memory. He saw how Liam bowed his head to apologize, how Junie's hands shook as she carried trays of water, how Derek barked orders with a tilted chin, how the staff silently endured to keep the only job they had. He placed the glass down, his thin hand gripping the counter tightly, his eyes flashing with resolve. That's enough. At that moment, an elderly customer in the corner of the diner softly told Liam as he placed down water, "You don't have to apologize for everything, dear." Liam froze, his eyes widening, filled with an emotion he couldn't put into words. He looked at her, his lips trembling. "Thank you, ma'am." The old woman smiled, nodding, her kind eyes resting on him like a silent encouragement. Liam turned away, his shoulders still thin, but his steps were no longer heavy today. A small warmth flickered inside, pushing back the cold fear and silence. At the counter, the man took a deep breath, lifted his head, his eyes brighter, steadier. It was time for him to act. Derek's cold voice cut through the air. "What the hell is this, Theo? What do you think you're doing?" Theo opened his mouth, his voice shaking. I'm sorry. Derek's voice dropped, each word a sharp knife. Sorry. Huh. Do you know how much each of those bowls cost? Huh. Theo lowered his head, his entire body trembling, a flash of sharp fear in his eyes. Liam stood not far away, his hand gripping the water tray so tightly it turned white, his eyes wide, breath caught in his throat. Junie glanced at Liam, her eyes filled with fear and a hint of anger. Her look seemed to say, "That's enough." Derek stepped closer, his voice tightening. "This is your last warning, got it? One more screw-up and you're out." A deadly silence fell across the diner, only a child's soft sobbing, Theo's ragged breathing, and the sound of the wind whistling through the door's cracks could be heard. And then the man polishing the glass set it down. He stepped out from behind the counter, each step slow but sure, his gaze no longer gentle but sharp with determination. He stopped in front of Derek, his voice calm, clear, with no need to shout, "Stop!" Derek froze, turning around, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "Who do you think you are?" The man looked Derek straight in the eyes, cutting him off. "I'm the one who built this place, and you've forgotten what it was built for." Derek scoffed, ready to argue, but when he saw the man's eyes, the smirk vanished, replaced with confusion. The entire diner went silent, each staff member lifting their heads, each customer turning to watch, the air thickening for a few heavy seconds. Liam stood a few steps away, his eyes wide, his lips moving, "Sir." The man turned to Liam, giving a small nod, then back to Derek. "You're fired, effective immediately." The sound of a spoon dropping, a customer exhaling, a child's sob stopping, all marked the end of a silence that had lasted too long. Derek's mouth opened, but no words came out, his face paling, his hand gripping the cold coffee cup so hard the plastic lid cracked. He looked around, seeing all the eyes on him, then turned and quickly walked out, leaving a heavy silence behind. The man turned, his eyes sweeping across the diner, then bowed his head, saying to everyone, "I'm sorry for letting it get this far." A light wave spread across the room, staff members' eyes meeting each other. Junie looking at Liam, Liam looking at Theo, all of them turning toward the man. In that moment, a weight lifted. Breaths became easier, eyes lost some of their fear, and a gentle warmth spread through the tired corners of the diner. After the door closed behind Derek, a strange calm settled over the diner. The exhaust fans still hummed. The rain outside had nearly stopped, only the occasional drop tapping on the awning. The man looked around at the confused, worried, yet hopeful faces. He didn't smile, but his eyes were serious and warm as he gently placed his thin hand on the counter, his voice rising just enough for all to hear. "We start over. From today." Junie stood behind the counter, her hands still trembling, her eyes brimming with tears. She looked at Liam standing nearby, holding a water tray, his eyes wide, unable to believe what had just happened. The man looked at Liam, giving a small nod. "You've done well." Liam's lips moved, his throat tightening, breaths quickening, sweat on his forehead mixing with the tears slipping from the corners of his eyes. He bowed his head, gripping the water tray tightly, then lifted his gaze, his eyes brighter, steadier. "Thank you, sir." The man stepped into the kitchen, where Theo still stood, his hands shaking slightly, his eyes red from age and countless late-night shifts. The man placed a hand on Theo's shoulder, his voice low. "You've kept this kitchen going. I know that." Theo looked up, his lips trembling, before he broke down, covering his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. The man said nothing more, simply standing beside him, gripping his shoulder gently, a silent comfort. At the counter, Junie set the water tray down, looking up at the man. Who are you?" He turned, looking at Junie, warmth in his eyes. "I'm the one who laid the first brick for this place, and I forgot why I did it." Junie pressed her lips together, a tear dropping onto the water tray, making a small sound that echoed in her heart. The man turned back, his voice louder now, clear for everyone to hear. "Starting tomorrow, everyone will get their breaks on time, a hot meal before their shift, and respect. If you need to adjust your schedule for school, exams, or to care for someone, say it directly. No one will have their hours cut for that ever again." Whispers broke into the air, and Junie covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Liam stood frozen for a moment, then gave a small nod, a faint smile forming on his lips. The man's eyes swept across the diner. "If there's something you need to say it now. We will not stay silent anymore." For a few seconds, the room was quiet. And then a young busboy stood up, his voice trembling. I dropped out of school to take the morning shift because I was scared they'd cut my hours." The man walked over, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Go back to school. This job will be here when you return." Another kitchen worker lifted his head, his voice hoarse. "I was fired once for taking time off to care for my mother." The man gripped his hand, nodding. "Go care for your mother. Family comes first." Voices began to rise, one by one, breaking free from the silence that had lasted too long. Each confession carried tears, trembling, fear, but was replaced by relief as they were heard. Liam stood quietly, each word striking his heart like cool raindrops falling on parched earth. He realized he wasn't alone, that those who had silently carried burdens, who had endured, were now beginning to breathe, to cry, to speak their truth. Truth can hurt, but silence hurts more. The man stepped closer to Liam, looking directly into his eyes. "Tomorrow, you don't need to apologize anymore. Just work with your heart. Let me handle the rest." Liam looked at him, gratitude, trust, and resolve shining in his eyes. In that moment, for the first time in so long, he realized he didn't have to bow his head just to survive anymore. A soft breeze slipped in as someone opened the door, the scent of rain drifting inside, carrying freshness that swept away the stifling air, leaving a new atmosphere in a small diner once suffocated by unheard sighs. That evening, for the first time in many months, Liam did not leave the diner with heavy shoulders. As he walked home, he lifted his gaze to the night sky, stars faintly glittering between clouds that had just parted, cool post-rain air filling each breath. His steps were tired, but no longer dragging. His small backpack swayed with each step. His worn-out shoes still squeaked softly on the damp sidewalk. But he no longer felt ashamed. That day, he had witnessed tears wiped away by listening, fears soothed by the words, "I understand. I'm here." Before leaving, the man had placed a gentle hand on Liam's shoulder, looking deep into his eyes, his voice warm. "Tomorrow, get to school on time. Liam, this job will wait for you, and you no longer have to sacrifice your dreams to keep it." Liam bowed deeply, his voice shaking. "Thank you, sir." The man only smiled, stepping back, letting Liam walk away in silence, but it was no longer the lonely silence it had been before. The next morning, as sunlight slipped through the window, Liam woke up without the alarm startling him awake. He opened his eyes, looking at the old ceiling, then at the desk piled with books. On it, his exam clock blinked, reminding him that today was an important test, a test he had once planned to miss to work the morning shift, just to keep a few extra dollars. Today, he put on his backpack, slipped into his worn-out shoes, took a deep breath, and stepped outside with a light smile. The cool morning breeze brushed through his hair. Sunlight glinted on leftover puddles, reflecting a clear blue sky in his eyes. He ran down the sidewalk, his heart racing, both afraid of being late and feeling a strange sense of freedom. At the diner, Junie arrived for her shift, her hands no longer trembling. She smiled when she saw Theo standing by the stove, his eyes brighter, his voice steadier as he called out orders. Other staff greeted each other softly, no longer afraid of judging eyes, no longer avoiding Derek's presence because Derek was no longer there. The man from yesterday, Jackson, was still there by the counter today, polishing a glass, wearing a simple shirt with sleeves rolled up, his eyes following each step of the employees, each customer's greeting, each small smile blossoming on faces that had known only bowed heads for too long. He stepped into the dining area, sitting at an empty table, ordering a coffee, sipping it slowly, his eyes taking in every detail: a little girl being served orange juice, an elderly woman smiling as she received her check, Junie smiling as she handed a tray of water to a customer, Theo exhaling in relief as a dish was sent out on time. He saw a system once rotting in silence, now beginning to revive through listening. That afternoon, Liam returned to the diner, his breathing still heavy from running from school, but unlike before, he no longer had to hide his notebooks, no longer feared being scolded for being late. Junie saw him, her smile bright. "Finished your test?" Liam nodded, smiling. "Yeah, it went well." Jackson stepped out from the counter, gently patting his shoulder. "Good, now, let's finish the evening shift. But remember, if you're tired, take a break, and make sure you eat before you work." Liam pressed his lips together, his eyes shimmering, nodding. He stepped into the wash area, the cool water running over his thin hands, washing away the dust from the test, rinsing away the worries that had once weighed so heavily on his heart. He looked at himself in the mirror, his young face with dark circles under his eyes. But today, his eyes were brighter, steadier, and for the first time in many months, he saw himself smiling. Life can be cruel, can push people to their limits. But a hand reaching out at the right moment, a simple "I understand, I will listen," can save a soul on the verge of collapse. And those who once thought they were nothing but small cogs in a giant system were, in fact, the ones holding that system together. That evening, the lights in the diner were no longer a tired yellow, but warm and bright. The customers' laughter blended with the fragrant smell of toasted bread, the crackle of hot oil, and the sound of the glass door opening to welcome a cool breeze. Liam stood behind the counter, holding a water tray, his eyes focused but no longer tense. He saw a child playing with a spoon at a table, and he gave a soft smile when the child giggled, warmth filling his eyes. Junie passed by, lightly tapping Liam's shoulder, handing him a cold towel. "Drink some water, then keep going. You don't need to run yourself down." Liam took it, looking at her, smiling. "Thank you." At the counter, Jackson still stood polishing glasses, but occasionally he set the glass down, stepping out to help clear tables, wipe up spills, pick up fallen spoons. His eyes followed everyone, no longer observing from afar, but walking alongside them, listening to every breath. Near the end of the shift, as the customers began to thin out, Liam stood by the glass door, watching the light drizzle on the street. Headlights reflected off the puddles, forming long streaks like roads leading to futures he once thought unreachable. Jackson stepped beside him, silent for a moment, then asked Liam, "Did you ever have a dream?" Liam flinched slightly, turning to look at him, his eyes briefly confused. He pressed his lips together. Taking a breath, I once wanted to finish college, to get a job that would make things easier for my mum. But then I kept thinking, if I didn't work, if I didn't have money, she would suffer even more. Jackson nodded, his eyes softening. "I understand. But Liam, your dream isn't wrong, and it doesn't have to be abandoned just because you're helping your mum. Helping your family doesn't mean forgetting yourself." Liam lowered his head, his hands clenching, his voice shaking. "But if I don't work, my mum—" Jackson placed a hand on his shoulder, his gaze firm. "You will still work, but you won't have to sacrifice everything. I will adjust your shifts, help with your tuition, as long as you promise to keep studying. Because your tomorrow, and all of our tomorrows, will no longer look like today." Liam stepped into the diner, his small backpack on his shoulders, his worn-out shoes making their soft squeak. But his steps were no longer hesitant. He took a deep breath, smiling, as he walked up to the counter where Jackson stood, polishing a glass, his eyes kind. Jackson looked at him, nodding. "School go well?" Liam nodded, his smile brighter. "Yes, I did really well on my test." Jackson chuckled, setting the glass down, extending his hand. "Welcome back." Liam gripped his hand lightly, his eyes shining. "Thank you for holding on to my dream." Jackson patted his shoulder. "No, thank you for reminding me of my own." That day, the diner opened with a new rhythm. Liam ran food. Junie prepared drinks. Theo cooked. Everyone helping each other, sharing smiles when a child giggled, helping clean up spilled drinks without fear, because they knew someone would listen, someone would help, and there would be no scolding, no cut hours. An elderly woman sat in the corner, watching Liam serve, smiling gently. When Liam set down her water, she lightly held his hand, whispering, "Thank you for not giving up." Liam paused, his eyes misty, nodding. "I won't give up, ma'am." At the end of the day, as the diner quieted and the sunset bathed the room in gold, Jackson gathered everyone near the counter, his eyes meeting each of theirs before he spoke today. "We started over, and I am proud of every one of you." Junie lowered her head, hiding her blooming smile. Theo nodded softly, his eyes calm, and Liam stood tall, gripping the edge of his apron, his eyes shimmering. Jackson continued, his voice steady. "From now on, no one has to drop out of school to keep a job. No one will be blamed for mistakes they didn't make. No one will fear walking in for their shift. If you need something, speak up, and I will listen." He paused, looking at each of them, because a diner, a company, or any place can only exist when the people inside it are respected. That evening, as Liam left the diner, his steps were light, the cool night breeze brushing across his face, his hair rustling under the streetlights. He lifted his eyes to the stars, twinkling above, and for the first time in a long time, he believed in tomorrow. He turned back, looking at the diner behind him, the lights still glowing inside, reflecting on the sign that read, "A place where dreams are heard."